On a quiet Monday morning, the Garrington Bank lobby hummed with the usual rhythm of business, clicking heels, murmured greetings, and the faint tapping of keyboards behind polished desks. Among the early arrivals sat a well-dressed black woman in a deep emerald hat, her presence elegant but unassuming. She entered without fanfare, took a seat, and waited for a meeting that no one seemed in a hurry to honor. Employees passed her without a second glance. Clients were greeted ahead of her, even those who arrived much later. Behind the glass door, the bank manager, Martin Bell, moved from desk to desk, shaking hands, pouring coffee, laughing, never once acknowledging the woman waiting quietly by the window. It appeared to be just another day at the bank. But what none of them realized was that the woman they ignored had already changed the future of Garrington Bank forever. And while Martin Bell thought he was exercising his authority, he was, in truth, writing the first line of his own undoing. And so began the moment when the bank manager made the black woman wait 2 long hours, with no idea who she truly was. The woman in the green hat enters. It was exactly 9:45 a.m. when the glass doors of Garrington Bank hissed open. The morning sun, cruel and unfiltered, bounced off their polished surface as if trying to warn the world something unusual was about to happen. In stepped a woman, all graceful, composed. Her skin was the rich brown of coffee brewed strong, her posture regal without arrogance. She wore a forest green hat, wide, brimmed and slightly tilted, with a netted veil that danced faintly in the air-conditioned breeze. Her coat was simple, pressed, and elegant. A faded leather purse hung from her wrist like an old friend. She walked with a sense of calm that didn't demand attention. It commanded it. Heads turned, though none would admit it. She made her way to the reception desk, heels echoing softly against the marble floor. Behind the counter, a young woman greeted her with that artificial warmth bank staff reserve for people they think don't matter. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" The woman's voice was low, smooth, precise. "I need to speak with the branch manager. It's a private matter." No raised tone, no smile, just a quiet gravity that made her sound less like a customer and more like a chapter waiting to be read. The receptionist blinked, paused, then nodded. Of course. One moment. She typed something, too casually, and buzzed the office beyond. In that moment, everyone went back to their business, but no one really stopped watching her. She didn't sit yet. She stood by the counter, her eyes scanning the golden, framed certificates on the walls, the potted plants that had seen too many Mondays, and the security guard pretending not to stare. The manager didn't come out, but that's when he entered the story. Dismissed at a glance, Martin Bell was everything you'd expect from a man who measured his importance by the weight of his wristwatch. Mid-30s, overconfident, with a designer tie and an undercurrent of arrogance that filled every inch of the office long before he opened his mouth. When he stepped out of his glass-walled office and saw her standing there, he didn't see the green hat. He didn't see the composed posture. What he saw was his own assumption. He walked over not briskly, not lazily, but with the kind of pace that said, "I'm only doing this because I'm curious why she's still standing." His lips parted into a polite, but firm smile, the kind that says no. Before the words even come, "Good morning, you asked to see me," the woman turned, slow and steady, her gaze locking with his. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. "Yes, I have a private banking matter I'd like to discuss directly." Martin didn't ask what it was. He didn't ask her name. Instead, he gave her the look, the one that weighs you, judges you, files you under not worth the time. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." He smiled wider, but it was thinner now, as if forced through gritted teeth. "Unfortunately, we're very busy today. You'll have to wait." With that, he motioned casually toward the waiting chairs, the ones nearest the window, where the sun would be cruelest by noon. She nodded once, without a word, and made her way to the seat. She sat like a queen on a throne of plastic and chrome, her dignity untouched by the temperature of the room, or the temperature of the man who had just dismissed her. Martin turned away, confident he had just handled another minor disruption. Little did he know, the next few hours would undo everything he thought he knew about power, respect, and who really runs the world. The 2-hour wait the woman sat, still, silent, unbothered on the surface, but beneath that veil her eyes moved like clock hands. patient, precise, watching everything. One leg crossed neatly over the other, gloved hands resting atop her purse. She looked like someone waiting for a performance to begin, not a service to be granted. Minutes dragged, the bank ticked on, the receptionist glanced her way occasionally, uneasy. Customers arrived, some loud, some chatty, some familiar. Most were white, dressed in pastel blouses and linen pants, their shoes squeaking cheerfully across the marble floor. They were greeted with warmth, welcomed with smiles, and most of all seen. One man, wearing a gold watch and smelling like aftershave and ego, walked in and said, "Need to speak to Martin." He was ushered in within 5 minutes. An elderly couple came in for loan paperwork. 10 minutes, they were offered coffee. A young entrepreneur needed to discuss expanding his business account. Straight to the office. Martin shook his hand like they were old friends. And all the while she waited, no complaint, no question, no shifting in her seat. The room felt the weight of her silence more than they would have felt outrage. By the time the bank's grandfather clock struck 11:45, a full 2 hours had passed. The woman hadn't moved, but every tick of that clock had shaved something off Martin's image in the eyes of the staff. Even the receptionist, once dismissive, now looked uncomfortable, stealing nervous glances at her manager's door. But the woman, she remained composed, like someone who'd long ago mastered the art of being underestimated. Others are prioritized and welcomed the double doors to Martin's office, opened and closed like stage curtains, again and again, but never for her. He had smiled for others, broadly, had offered them seats inside, sometimes laughter. At one point he even stepped out personally to greet a client at the door, hand extended before the man had said a word. But not once did he look toward the woman in the green hat. It wasn't just neglect. It was a performance, a quiet, consistent act of erasure. Each person who entered after her and was served before her became part of the pattern. Even the security guard started noticing. He tapped his pen against his notepad rhythmically, eyes flicking between Martin's office and the woman by the window. She had come in earlier than all of them, spoken less than all of them, yet had waited longer than anyone should, and Martin, he was coasting, riding the high of authority like it was oxygen. To him, she was invisible, probably some inheritance confusion. He had said earlier under his breath to a colleague, "Or a complaint about interest rates, you know how they get." That one word cracked through the silence like a whisper in a confession booth, and yet the woman gave no reaction. She watched, listened. Every favor Martin granted someone else, every apology he didn't give her, every smile that skipped her direction like she wasn't worth its muscles. The irony, of course, was that Martin believed he was winning, believed he was maintaining order, keeping the right. People happy and quietly pushing the wrong ones to the margins. He thought he knew exactly who mattered. He didn't know he was walking into a moment that would be etched in his career's obituary. Because what he hadn't noticed, what none of them had, was the black town car slowly pulling up outside the glass doors. Inside were 5 board members, and they weren't there for a meeting. They were there for her. The quiet storm still she waited. Her posture never sagged. Her eyes never wandered pointlessly. She sat like a statue carved from common, moving but unmistakably present. Even the way she breathed felt measured, like each inhale was timed, and each exhale knew a secret. The purse on her lap stayed closed, but you got the feeling that if she opened it, the truth would come pouring out like a tidal wave. No phone, no watch checking, no restless leg shaking. This woman had the patience of someone who had waited her whole life, not just for service in a bank, but for people to finally see her. The air in the bank had shifted, subtle but there. A few customers stole glances at her and then at the staff, as if silently asking, "Has no one helped her yet?" But no one said a word. That's how systems work. Quiet bias, loudly ignored. The receptionist grew red in the cheeks each time she looked over. The security guard now lingered closer to her end of the room, almost protectively, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was instinct, or maybe, just maybe, he could feel the storm she carried just beneath that veil, because storms don't always start with thunder. Sometimes they sit, they wait. They gather until it's time, and she was waiting for that time. When the doors opened at exactly 12:03 p.m., the bank doors opened with an audible click and a gust of cooled outside air. 5 figures entered, 3 men, 2 women, all dressed with an understated elegance that screamed old money without saying a word. Their suits were tailored, their shoes untouched by dust, their silence louder than any greeting. Martin Bell saw them instantly. He jumped up so fast he nearly tripped over his own polished leather shoes. "Mr. Langford, M.S. Hanley, we weren't expecting you today," but they weren't listening. Their eyes were scanning the room, searching for someone. Not him, not anyone he considered important, and then they saw her. There was a pause, the kind that pulls the breath from a room and snaps it in half. The older man in the center, Langford, chairman of the board, broke into a grin not even age could tame. He moved fast for a man in his 70s, heading straight toward the woman in the green hat. "Margaret," he said, voice warm, full of something close to awe, "you came early." Every set of eyes in the lobby turned. The silence was now deafening. Margaret, yes, Margaret stood gracefully, powerfully, as if the chair had never held her, only waited to release her. "I thought I'd observe the atmosphere before we began." The others from the board followed. They shook her hand, they smiled like she was a queen returning home, and then came the words that detonated every assumption Martin Bell had built like sandcastles around himself. "Everyone, this is Margaret Dupree, our new majority shareholder." Time fractured. Reality cracked. Martin's face drained of color. The receptionist gasped audibly. The guard straightened like a soldier in inspection, because this wasn't just a woman with a banking request. This was a woman who had watched every second of her own mistreatment, and now stood above it, owning the very place that had tried to ignore her. The green hat. Now it looked like a crown. And Martin, he looked like a man who had just realized he'd been stepping on a landmine. For 2 straight hours, recognition and reverence, Martin stood frozen, caught mid-step between arrogance and shock. The board members surrounded Margaret like stars orbiting their sun. Their greetings were not casual, they were honors, full of respect, layered with history. M.S. Hanley, the youngest board executive, leaned in with genuine admiration. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person, M.S. Dupree. We've heard so much. More rise your investments. Truly inspiring." Margaret nodded gracefully, her lips offering the faintest smile. "Thank you. I believe observation reveals more than reports ever can." The atmosphere in the bank shifted on its axis, every customer, every employee watching. Martin's mouth opened, searching for words, but his voice had abandoned him. The woman he made wait had just turned the hierarchy upside down without raising her tone or voice. She wasn't just someone important. She was the centerpiece of power, standing where only minutes ago she had been ignored. The hidden queen revealed as the murmurs spread, more details surfaced. Margaret Dupree, it turned out, was not only the majority shareholder of Garrington Bank, but also the woman behind its recent expansion into underserved communities. Her portfolio had quietly absorbed stock, climbing silently until she owned 51% of the very institution that had asked her to wait. But what stunned everyone most wasn't just her status, it was the story beneath it. She had once cleaned floors in that same building. Years ago, worn the uniform, pushed the mop. People had stepped over her then, just as Martin had dismissed her now. Her rise wasn't luck. It was strategy, steadfastness, vision sharpened by decades of being overlooked. "Sometimes," she said softly, "you must let people show you who they are before you decide what they're worth." The room bowed in silence. In Martin, he had never felt so small. A manager's fall from pride. Martin Bell stood paralyzed, a stiff smile frozen on his face like wax under a heat lamp. His eyes darted from board member to board member, then back to Margaret M.S. Dupree, he now remembered to call her. "M.S. Dupree," he stammered. I wasn't aware." She cut him off with nothing more than a look, calm, controlled, deadly in its silence. "No, Mr. Bell, you were aware. You just didn't care." Gasps were muffled. Even the security guard dropped his gaze. Martin's polished image, his rehearsed charm, his practiced authority, crumbled with each breath. This wasn't just embarrassment, it was exposure. He had spent the morning performing for status. Now that performance had been flipped like a broken mirror, each shard cutting into the illusion he wore so confidently. The board said nothing, they didn't need to. Their silence was approval of her, not him. Martin Bell had built his career on knowing who mattered, and now he didn't even matter in his own office. The cleaner who bought the bank the story, whispered in corners later that week, was this. Margaret Dupree had once cleaned the floors of Garrington Bank years ago. Long before the renovations, before the glass walls and chrome accents, she had walked those marble tiles with a mop in her hand while others walked past her like furniture. But Margaret hadn't just cleaned. She'd observed, learned, read forgotten newspapers left on desks, studied conversations, noticed patterns, and saved. Slowly, smartly, when she left, no one noticed. Years passed, then came investments. Property, stocks, she never stopped. Every brick of her empire laid by hands once blistered by bleach and hard labor. Now she stood in the center of that same bank, not as staff, not as customer, as owner. "You thought you saw a cleaner," she said to Martin, "but I was just passing through." That moment didn't just humiliate a man, it rewrote the rules of power, respect, and perception. Margaret Dupree didn't demand a seat at the table. She bought the whole room. When Margaret Dupree finally walked out of Garrington Bank that day, she did so with her head high and the entire board behind her. Martin Bell, now pale and trembling, sat in his office with the weight of humiliation heavier than any reprimand. No one needed to raise their voice, the truth had spoken for itself. In a single morning, a woman once overlooked had reclaimed every ounce of dignity that had ever been denied to her, not with anger but with presence. Her quiet had spoken louder than shouting ever could. Her success didn't just challenge assumptions, it shattered them. Everyone who witnessed it would remember, the receptionist, the guard, the customers, and most of all Martin Bell, because that day a woman once mistaken for invisible had reminded them all, power isn't loud, power is knowing exactly who you are and letting the world figure it out. Far too late.